Morning, folks. It's Friday morning and I unexpectedly have the day off. See, Red Hat occasionally gives us these days called recharge days, and they always sneak up on me. And what that means is I have a weekday off and no plan for anything to do. So, what am I going to do today? I'm going to make you a video about reinstalling this machine. That sounds really interesting, right? Bear with me. So I know what you're asking. What even is this machine? Well, this is my Alienware Aurora R10. I bought it right during the pandemic when GPU prices were so high. The reason I bought a pre-built like this is because it was the only way I could get a GPU that wasn't a ridiculous amount of money. GPUs have come down in price since then. So if I were to do this thing again, I'd probably build it from scratch like I normally do. The reason I wanted to highlight this fact that it's a tower here, right, instead of what I think is more common today, which is either a laptop or a handheld device, is because with the tower, I can do stuff like open this thing up and change stuff. So this machine is about 4 years old. I'm pretty happy with its performance still, but if the day comes that the GPU is not performing like I need it to, I can replace it. Today, what I'm going to do is swap an additional hard drive in here. In fact, what I'm going to actually do is take out the NVMe drive that it came with and replace it with a larger one. Now, I get it. You can do that on laptops usually as well, but it's not nearly as easy. Check this out. All I need is this Phillips screwdriver. One screw back here comes out, one very long screw, and then I lose it. It's right there. Remember where that fell. It's probably vanished into my carpet now. Then you pop this guy up, out, and then the side comes off. And now I'm already like mostly where I need to be. Now the way this case is designed, there's like a lever down here, and then this whole thing folds out. Right down there is where my NVMe is. I may have to move a wire or two so I can get to it cleanly, but again, Phillips screwdriver, pop out the NVMe, pop in a new one, and then I'm going to be ready to go. I didn't really answer the question, why? Why am I rebuilding this machine, or why am I reinstalling this machine? When I bought this machine 4 years ago, the Linux gaming space was not so great. Things like the Steam Deck either weren't around yet, or they were only just getting started. Did it again. I need a hard hat. I keep hitting this. And the Steam Deck was really what changed gaming on Linux. So when I bought this machine, if you wanted to game, you needed Windows. And personally, since way back, we're talking the 90s, I have wanted a fully Linux desktop experience. Now, I'm still not quite there yet. I have two main use cases for this machine, and the first is gaming, because I like to game in my off time. But the second is media creation and editing. And in fact, this video is going to be edited on this machine once I've got it reinstalled. So let's hope it goes well. But Windows has always been the primary citizen on this machine, because when I bought it, the NVMe drive that I've got right here came pre-installed with Windows on it. So I added this second SSD drive at some point, and that's where I put Linux. And the Linux gaming space has really matured in the years since I bought this machine, right? Now where'd that screw go? Is that it there? I hope that's it there. Anyway, the Linux gaming space, powered a lot by the Steam Deck and the development of Proton, have really changed gaming on Linux. I'm not going to get this screw without a screwdriver, without a frickin'... Okay. The Steam Deck really changed gaming on Linux. I have my little tweezers now to get that screw I can't reach. And with the advent of the Steam Deck, you know, Steam was motivated to make sure gaming on Linux was perfect, or as perfect as it could be, because the Steam Deck runs Linux. Now, there is a spin of Fedora called Bazzite. And Bazzite is actually designed to run on the Steam Deck. It's meant to be a Steam OS replacement for the Steam Deck running on a Fedora base, which is, I think, really freaking cool. Because that means it's designed to game. The cool thing about Bazzite, though, isn't just that it's Linux, isn't just that it's designed to run on a Steam Deck, but is that it's designed to run on anything. I have Bazzite on my Steam Deck, and I've run Bazzite on this machine as a second operating system for a while now. Before that, I ran Fedora as a second operating system. So if you prefer a full-on Fedora experience, you can do that as well. Gaming on Fedora benefited from gaming on Steam Deck in the same way that Bazzite did. Bazzite is just made to be more, I don't know, appliance-like. Once you get it installed, updates are easier. It uses bootc technology, which is the same as what RHEL Image Mode uses, which is something I've been pretty interested in at work. And I can talk more about that, or in fact, no, I'm not going to talk more about that here, but I will maybe put some links to some more information about what bootc is in the description of the video if you're that curious. But it basically turns the Linux installation into a container image, which makes it really easy to deploy updates. And it also means that they can prepackage stuff like the NVIDIA drivers for this behemoth of a video card, which have always been a sticky point on a standard Linux install. It's just difficult to get those installed on Fedora. Now, other distributions aren't as purist as Fedora, and because of that, they can include the Linux GPU drivers, but Fedora doesn't because they have reasons. But with Bazzite, they can prepackage it in that image, and that works for AMD as well if you have an AMD card. But I'm talking too much. I just about have this drive installed. Once I get it done, I'm going to probably go get a shower because I literally just woke up. And then I'm going to get Windows reinstalled because I don't think you care about watching me install Windows. So I'm going to put Windows on this drive, which is the slower drive. And then that new NVMe that I put in there, I'm upgrading from 1 terabyte to 2 because all of my gaming is now going to happen on Linux. Because to be honest, I haven't had to boot Windows to run a game in a very long time. But like I said, I still need Windows for the Adobe stuff. So this 1 terabyte SSD is going to be used almost entirely as an Adobe machine. Oh, why am I doing Windows first is probably a good question to answer. That's because Windows does not care about other operating systems on your machine. It will happily trample all over them. It goes a lot smoother if you put Windows on first and then install your Linux distribution, whether that's Bazzite or something else, because a Linux distribution comes along with a multi-operating system bootloader, grub, and it can be configured to boot the other operating system that's on the machine. So I find it easiest to start with a fresh machine, get Windows installed, even if Windows is intended to be not your primary tenant, and then install Linux, right? And then you can configure the bootloader so that it boots either. So, all right, let me finish this up. Let me get it all reconnected. Let me get set up to record. Let me wash the sleep out of my eyes, and then we'll get started in earnest. Looks like I haven't missed too much. Let's go ahead and get this installation finished up. So here we are back at a Windows 11 desktop. You can tell right behind me here that it is fresh out of the box. I did a couple of minor things. I haven't installed even my graphics driver or anything yet. This is just what came out of the box with Windows. I installed Firefox because that is the #1 thing I do to any machine when I first sit down at it. And I installed OBS so I can do some screen captures, but otherwise it's completely out of the box install. The goal of getting to Windows was just to get it there so that I could then get back to it later in order to finish its setup. The next thing I want to do is go get Bazzite. So let's go ahead and download Bazzite. All right, so here we are at bazzite.gg. I'll put a link to that in the description of the video, but what we're going to do here is click on the Download Bazzite button up here at the top. It takes you to the bottom of the page, essentially, where you can download Bazzite. Now, unlike other operating systems, this is not just download the ISO and install it and go. It asks you a couple questions before you get started. And those questions are around what kind of hardware you're going to be using and what kind of desktop experience you want. And that's because it pre-packages that for you. So you don't have to make those decisions at installation time. So let's click select your hardware. I'm on a desktop. Now there's some specific things in here for like, what if I'm on a framework desktop, which I think is kind of cool. There's also things for Steam Deck, the Lenovo Legion. You can see there's a whole bunch of items in here that you can pick. I actually just put Bazzite on an old, like, my gosh, it might be 15 years old, Dell Inspiron, which had an older NVIDIA discrete adapter in it. And it works. I mean, I'm not gaming on it, but I needed something to put on it so I could use it for a secondary purpose. But anyway, was the vendor of your GPU, and this is so it knows what drivers to include in the image you're downloading. As you saw when I had my machine open, I'm on an NVIDIA card, so we're going to pick NVIDIA there. And what desktop environment do you want, KDE or GNOME? I'm going to say for gaming, I have found KDE to work better. I do prefer GNOME's desktop experience, but I had some display problems with GNOME, which I don't know if they're fixed or not. KDE is a pretty good experience. It feels a little more like Windows too. So if you're a Windows user installing Linux for the first time, KDE might be a better experience for you. All right, and then do you want to take it straight into Steam gaming mode? Now this would be, if you're installing a piece of hardware that is intended to be just a gaming machine or connected to a television, for example, like a console would be. You could tell it to go right into Steam gaming mode. I want a traditional desktop experience because this is going to be a general purpose machine for me. It's just that one of those purposes is gaming. So we're going to say no. And then we just click on this download Bazzite NVIDIA open. Now the other thing we need is a way to write that ISO file to a USB stick. What I use to do that is a tool called Fedora Media Writer. The normal Fedora project, if you were to download an ISO there, on their downloads page, they have a link to the Fedora Media Writer. Do you have to use Fedora Media Writer? No. I know a lot of folks that use a tool called Ventoy. I've never used it, though. Fedora Media Writer is the one I'm familiar with. It does the job. But if you want to look into a different tool, feel free. So we're going to grab the Fedora Media Writer for Windows right here. Fedora Media Writer 64. All right, so Fedora Media Writer is finished writing. It took some time. I got some other stuff done in Windows while I was waiting for that to run, and now we're ready to reboot using that USB stick and actually install Bazzite. Unfortunately, my capture card, which is a mirror box, doesn't like my monitor. So I can't capture I can't cleanly capture the installation process. So what I'm going to do is set you up over my shoulder, and hopefully you can at least get a feel for what the actual installation process looks like. And then once we're up in Bazzite, I'll see what I can do about getting a better desktop capture. All right, so here we go. We're at Windows 11. I already have the USB stick in the USB port on the front of my tower because I just finished writing it. And we're just going to reboot. Okay, now as you're rebooting, if you're not familiar with this, usually there's a key you got to press to get it to bring up a boot menu. In my case, that is F12. So as soon as I see my motherboard vendor, or in this case Dell's logo, I'm going to start hitting F12. There we go. So basically we're going to pick the USB 1 UEFI OS SanDisk. So we're going to click on that, and here it is giving us the installation options for Bazzite. Now, there's two options here. One says install, one says test this media and install. One thing the Fedora Media Writer does during the installation or during the write is it then validates it. So I already know that this media should be okay. So I'm just going to go ahead with the install. And the installation is going to feel a whole lot like any other Fedora installation, which is it brings you to the Anaconda installation wizard. Now, with Bazzite, you get a lot fewer options, and you're going to see that in just a moment. So this is just language selection, simple
pick your language and your keyboard. And then this is really the only questions it's going to ask us. We already have a keyboard selected. It wants to know where we want to install it to and what user we want to create. And there's some network and language configuration that we can do here. Installation destination. Now this should be pretty simple. Now remember the size of your disks, because that's the first way to identify where you want to install to. In my case, I know that the Windows installation is on this 1 terabyte drive. It shows up as 931.51 gigabytes. And it even tells me the make and model of the drive underneath. So that's your second thing to look out for. If you know the drive manufacturer, then that makes this simpler. Now, I've got 2 other drives here, both of which are 1.82 terabytes. And that could be confusing if you don't know what drive is what, right? I know that this one says it's SDA. That's more likely a SATA disk, right? And I know that the spinning disk that I use for data is a SATA disk, right? So SDA. SDB is my other SATA disk. That's the SSD drive that I just installed Windows on. And NVMe 0N1 is more likely an NVMe drive. And I know that I put in a 2 terabyte NVMe drive that I want to install Linux on. So we're going to pick that one. Notice the little check mark shows up there. I don't know if that shows up well, but it puts a little check mark next to it. And then we can do automatic storage configuration, or we can do it manually. I honestly think I'm just going to go ahead with automatic in this case, because I don't see any reason that I should do a manual partition setup. This is just a desktop. What this is probably going to do is it's probably going to allocate as much disk space as possible to my home directory, which is exactly what I'm going to want on this kind of a machine. And we're going to go ahead and click on the Done button. All right, so destination chosen. Now we're going to click on user creation, and we're going to make me a user. My name's Nate, and I'm going to go with the usual user that I create on machines as I create them. Now note it's not asking us about root. That's because the root account is only accessible through sudo on this particular installation. So we're going to go ahead and give this a nice, good, strong password. Okay. Now if we were using like remote login through, or not remote login, if we're using remote identities through like IDM or something, that's what this advanced button is for, but we're not going to deal with that here. Let's hit the Done button. Okay, now we're also going to do some stuff with the network. I'm not going to configure wireless, although I could. I'm going to make sure that my Ethernet connection is set up here. You can see it's already got a DNS server and a default route and an IP assigned to it. That's because it used DHCP. But I do want to set a host name. I name my machines after anime characters. So this one is Escanor because he's big and powerful. And we're going to hit Done. Date and time, if you're in a, I don't know if it, I believe this defaults to America's New York, just because that's the default. You may have to set this yourself if you are not in that region, so just keep that in mind. And then we're going to go ahead and click the Begin Installation button. Now,
hey there, me again. So what's going on now? It's actually doing the installation. This differs from a Fedora installation, where with Fedora, what it would be doing right now is physically installing packages, right? It would have a repository on that USB stick, and it would be feverishly installing RPM packages from that USB stick according to whatever software selection we chose, right? Now, this didn't even ask us about software. It didn't ask us what we wanted installed. It didn't ask us what desktop environment to lay down, because it asked us that before we downloaded the ISO file. And the reason it does that is because you actually can't change it at this point. Instead of packages, what's on that USB stick is an actual container image, a bootable container image, using a technology called bootc. Now, what that means is, what this is doing at the moment is it took the drive that I told it to lay out that partition table on, it laid down the partitions, and now it is extracting the file system that is within that bootable container into my physical disk, right? And that's different than other Linux distributions, because that means that our operating system is managed more like a container, right? And the cool thing you can do with that is you can build your own container, your own bootable container based on the Bazzite core, just like you would any other container, right? Where you take that from line and say, take this whatever base container and add in my packages and then publish it back out to the world as my custom container that runs my application. Except in this case, the application is your desktop environment, right? So it's kind of a different way of thinking about Linux and kind of a different way of thinking about how you manage a system. But I think it's pretty cool. And I actually have my own custom bootable container image that I will deploy to this after we're done here today. But for the moment, I'm just trying to show you the core base setup and installation. So, all right, let's get back to the install.
All right, so that all took maybe 15 minutes. I didn't really time it, but I also don't have a clock in front of me. But anyway, it was not painfully long, but it took a little bit. We're going to click the reboot system button, which is all the way at the lower right-hand side of the screen that, I don't know, maybe you can't even see. No, you can see it down there. Look at that. Tiny little reboot button. We're going to click reboot. And what should happen is the system will go to grub. It will know nothing about Windows anymore because we'll have to do some steps to get that back. And then it should boot Bazzite. So let's see what that does. All right, I'm going to pull out that USB stick now, because we don't need it now. All right, so there we go. It's booting Bazzite. All right, there we go. Let's log in with that password that I had just set during the installation. And here we are, looking at our desktop. Okay, so in case you haven't guessed, I got my screen recording working. So I'm going to record this monitor, ignore OBS over there. The other cool thing is it got my orientation right. I love that. Okay, so all I did was install OBS. Steam came out of the box. Here it is. It asked me to log in as soon as I got to my desktop. I want to show you a couple things. Then we're going to log into Steam. I'm going to show you how really easy it is to just get up and running and start gaming on Bazzite. And there's two things you're going to want to know about gaming on Bazzite. One, if you game 100% through Steam, it's actually really, really simple. You log into Steam, you install games, and they work, right? Sometimes you have to putter around with what runner it uses and things like that, but most of the time, you install a game works. It's really cool. The other way is if you're not using Steam, or if you use Steam, but you also have games that you need to install manually, like you actually have installation media or something you downloaded from the internet, there's this extra tool called Lutris. And Lutris, which I'm going to try to open right now, is basically a front end for, it's a front end for running Wine and Proton. Proton is the thing that in the background makes Steam gaming so simple. So basically, this is a way to remove the Steam requirement for a game you've maybe downloaded from the internet, right? So you can actually add a game right in here. In some cases, you can search the Lutris website for installers, and you can just say, like, I need to install this game, and it'll actually go get the installer for you and help you do the installation. So that's actually really handy for games that are not on Steam. I know a lot of games are on Steam. Not everything's on Steam. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I am going to log into Steam using SteamGuard, because that's a good way to log into Steam when you're recording your screen. So let's go ahead. SteamGuard. All right, and in the recording, I will maybe try to blur out my identifying information if there is any. Go ahead, do the thing. Okay, here we go. And Steam, maybe there's an update, maybe there's not, I don't know. Oh, look, it's just in. It's already given me a notification that I have a friend online playing a game. So what we're going to do now is bring the Steam window up in the foreground here. Here, let's go to my library. That's what I care about anyway. Okay, so here's basically my Steam library. I'm trying to think of a game that would be quick to install. All right, so this is a relatively small game. We're going to go ahead and use Apocalypse Party as my demonstration of how easy this is. We're going to click the install button, and we're just going to say, go ahead, install. And this is going to start the download just like you'd expect from Steam. And it's going to run, you know, do its thing. Let's close out Elutris while we're here. I guess while that's installing, let me show you the software center here. It's called Bazaar. And this actually lets you browse Flatpaks, right? So if you're not familiar with the Flatpak, also think about the way we're running Bazzite here. Bazzite here is essentially a container. It's an immutable image. Some of that is, of course, persistent data like my home directory, but the operating system itself, if I were to install a package, in fact, I can't install a package like you would traditionally on Fedora. You have to use things like Flatpaks. Or you can run containers, or there's a couple other ways you can get an application installed. You can run things out of your home directory if the thing you're running supports that. But in this case, it's going to default to using Flatpaks. OBS that I installed, for example, was installed via a Flatpak. So what about, I don't know, is Discord installed? I don't think Discord's installed. Discord is not installed. So let's go ahead and find Discord, because if you're going to chat, you're going to want Discord. So there we go. Discord, we're going to click install, and it's going to install it. See the little bar at the top there? And this is installing the Flatpak installation of Discord. Now, Flatpak is like a container for applications, like a container for desktop applications is the best way I can describe it. It's not quite a container like you'd expect. It's not a Docker or Podman container. It's a Flatpak container. It's specifically, it containerizes an application that you might use in a desktop environment. All right, so those little notifications that are popping up are basically additional support packages that were installed when Apocalypse Party finished installing. So Discord is also finished here. So now if I close this and I just simply bring up my menu and look for Discord, there's Discord now. I'm not going to log into it and everything, but I just want to show you that it does fire up here. There you go. We could log into Discord at this point. Okay, so this finished installing. I just want to show you quick. If you right-click on the game you just installed and click Properties, there is a compatibility tab here, right? And we can force this to use a specific compatibility layer, right? And Proton is essentially what's in this list. In fact, it's all that's in this list. Now, when you install a game, it'll by default use whatever your defaults are for Proton. And if you don't check that box, that is. But if you need to try a different Proton runner, you can, right? So if it doesn't work on Proton Hotfix, maybe you try Experimental. If it doesn't work on Experimental, maybe you try 9.0-4. But most of the time, all you really have to do is install and run. But otherwise, this is the same old Steam configuration you'd expect, right? You can change command line options. You can change whether you're syncing with the cloud, all that stuff. We're just going to hit play. And what should happen is the game should launch. So it looks like it's downloading some content, which is making it a little bit slower to launch. On first launch, some of these games will do something like this, and then the second launch will be a lot faster. All right, so for some reason on that first launch, something went weird. It was probably because Steam was busy installing all those various dependency packages still. When I click the launch button, now you can see the status here. It says it's downloading content. You can see the bar at the bottom. This should actually work this time. You might ask, what about controller support? Bazzite actually supports controllers pretty nicely. I use a PlayStation 4 controller that I plug in via USB, although I think you can use them over Bluetooth. All right. It took a minute, but the game is launching. Now, if I were to launch this again, it would actually be quicker. I guarantee it. All right, so there we go. We got Apocalypse Party up and running. there doesn't seem to be any sound for some reason. I bet I know why. Yeah, we have the wrong output device selected. All right, now because I launched the game with the wrong on there, it'll probably... Let's try it again. In fact, I'll show you how quickly it should launch the second time. So now we actually have sound, or we should. Let's try this again. See how much quicker it launched the second time, which is good. Still no sound though. Get that. Oh, there is sound. I just can't hear it. There it is. I had the speakers turned down because I'm recording. So, at any rate, there you go. I'm not going to go play a game or anything, but there is my token game. You can see I've got Baldur's Gate and Shrouded, a bunch of Helldivers, right? These are all games that I have frequently played in Bazzite. I don't think I've launched a game in Windows in... It could be a year. It's at least 6 months. So you might ask, is it time to switch to a Linux desktop for gaming? I would argue that the answer is yes. All right, I'm going to go ahead and install Baldur's Gate because that's an important game for me.
So there's two sort of important things that I almost forgot to talk about. One, secure boot. I didn't have to do any of this because I had already installed Bazzite once before and gone through this procedure, and the key was already in my TPM in my system. But what normally happens is drivers that need to run inside of Bazzite are signed. If secure boot on your system is turned on, then some of those drivers that need to run within the Linux kernel will not be able to run because the TPM, the trusted platform module inside of your machine, will not allow them to run because it doesn't know the signature. It doesn't trust the person who signed the driver. And that's a good thing to have turned on, especially if you're dual booting Windows, because Windows, it's a common attack surface. If you download something weird from the internet and it tries to run something in Windows that it shouldn't, secure boot might actually help save your bacon. So I don't recommend turning it off, although that is one option. There are instructions from Bazzite about how to deal with secure boot, and I will link them in the description of this video. They go something like, turn off secure boot when you install Bazzite. Once it's done installing, there's a whole procedure you go through that gets secure boot turned back on and the signature from Bazzite installed into your TPM. And once you've done that, then you can go through and do the next thing that I thought was very important that I forgot to mention. How do I get back to Windows? So at the moment, if I reboot my machine, it only knows about Bazzite and it just boots into Bazzite, even though the installation of Windows is still there on the disk, right? So if you're in this situation and you're like, where's Windows? Don't panic. As long as you didn't wipe out the Windows drive when you were installing Bazzite, which is possible, so be careful when you're installing Bazzite, you should be able to tell Grub, which is the boot manager in Linux, hey, look for other operating systems and install them in my menu. But there's also some additional settings that you may want to turn on for Grub that basically tells it, remember the last entry that I booted, right? So imagine this. Grub has a default set. By default, that default is going to be Bazzite. When you boot into Windows and you're doing your thing, and then maybe you go to sleep or walk away, and Windows installs updates. It starts installing updates because they're turned on automatically. It reboots during those updates, and then the Grub default takes it back over to Bazzite. Your update's never finished. So then you have to reboot again, get back to Windows. When you get back to Windows, you have to let it finish the updates. It's annoying. If you tell Grub to remember the last option that you selected, then what it'll do is it'll write out a file that says, next time I boot the thing that my user booted last. And I'm going to show you how to do that quick, and then I'll show you how to actually generate that new grub configuration, detecting Windows and adding it back to the list. So let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, so I'm at a terminal. So we're gonna use sudo to edit etc defaults grub. Put in that same password. Okay, now what we're going to add to this file, we're going to go to the next line, and we're going to paste in these two extra options. Grub default equals saved, which tells grub my default is actually whatever I booted last time. And then we actually tell it, yes, save the default. So when I boot, save the default that I picked last time. Okay, now we're going to save that. And then there's a tool called grub mkconfig. grub2-mk config. And what this does is it'll output to the screen the grub configuration. Now, there might be a flag that tells it to write to a file, but what I usually just do is direct it to grub.cfg right in the directory that I'm in, which is probably okay. Just be careful where you run that. Make sure there's not already a grub.cfg. Now we have a new grub.cfg file, and you can see why there's a tool that generates this. It's really not easy to edit, right? This is, you can see there's the block about saving default. The grub config used to be a very easy to edit file, but not anymore. Now there should be an entry at the bottom, or near the bottom, for Windows. In fact, let's just search forward for Windows. There it is. Windows Boot Manager. So it generated this when I ran the grub2 mkconfig.
So now that I ran that make config, I have to actually put that grub file in place. So let's go ahead and do that too.
All right, so the grub config file lives inside of boot, and you can't modify boot as your standard user. I find it a whole lot easier to just become root. You do that with sudo-i. You can also use sudo su, but I use sudo-i, which basically says, give me an interactive shell as root. And because my sudo privileges don't limit me from doing that, I can do it. So we're going to go to boot, and inside of boot, you will see a grub2 subdirectory. And in there, there's a grub.cfg. Now, I will copy grub.cfg to grub.cfg.dist, and then from my home directory, grab that grub.cfg and put it here. Now, check the permissions. They look like they're right. Now, the thing is, I put it here out of habit. I don't think you have to put it here, but I do because I don't want to have to reboot and find out that it didn't work. What really matters is there's this EFI subdirectory, right? Now, this is actually a separate partition in your boot partition, and I don't want to go too deep into this, but this is basically where UEFI BIOSes find their boot information. So if I go into EFI, there's a subdirectory that's all caps EFI, and inside of there, there should be a Fedora subdirectory, okay? Now, you notice there's a grub.cfg in here as well. Now, you'll also have to copy it here. Grub.cfg here. Oh, wait, let me back this up first. Okay, now we should have grub.cfg here as well. What this should do is the next time I reboot, I should have Windows in my boot menu. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. But first I need to stop recording my screen share. Okay, now I'm going to close out all these applications. Okay, so there we go. Maybe you can't see that. Yeah, you can see. On this screen over here, you can see we've got Bazzite from Fedora Atomic, OS tree 0 and 1, and then right there we've got the Windows Boot Manager. So if I were to select Windows Boot Manager from here, it should get me back to Windows. There's a grubenv error. I forgot how I fixed that last time. I will find that information and put it into the description of the video, because I don't want to flub around on camera trying to figure that out. There's a command for grub that regenerates those env files, if I remember correctly. That's essentially where it saves the default. Okay, here we are back into Windows. Okay. Yay, Windows.
So, I know lately there's been a lot of fuss around Windows 11. There's been a lot of people that are jumping ship. They're heading from Windows over to some other operating system. Some people are landing on Mac, but you could argue that that's just, if you're thinking about gaming, Mac just isn't a great option. I've tried gaming on Mac. Some games work, a lot don't. It's really worse than the situation on Linux at this point. There was a point where gaming on Linux was just a non-starter. The only games you could actually run, there's a handful of developers that were kind enough to make native binaries for their games on Linux. Some of them you could run inside of Wine. There were some other projects that would help you run games through Wine or something like it. But really, support was terrible. The games didn't run well. They were buggy. They would crash a lot. Some games just flat out you couldn't make work. With the advent of Proton and... You're still recording. Yes, good. With the advent of Proton and all the work that's been done with the Steam Deck, gaming on Linux almost is to the point where it just works. It's my default at this point. Like I said, I just went through this whole procedure to make Windows a second-class citizen on my machine now. And if I didn't have that requirement of Adobe, I would have left it altogether. There's really no reason to run Windows anymore unless you have a compelling reason to do so because of application support. Yes, there's alternatives to the Adobe suite on other operating systems, or I could run Adobe on my work MacBook Pro, but to be honest, I really want my personal machine to do my personal things, like editing this video. I don't want to have to depend on hardware that's been given to me by my employer, because if my employment status changes for some reason, or if I decide to pick a different machine the next time I refresh my machine at work, I don't want to have to hinge my personal projects with my work machine, because I just don't feel like that's a good way to be. All right, so what do you think? Are you ready to switch to a Linux machine? Are you ready to move to a gaming rig powered by free open source software? Or mostly, if you discount that NVIDIA driver, that's the whole real snag with running. I'm rambling. If you are, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Check out the Bazzite community. They've got a discourse. Yeah, they've got message forums online. They've got a Discord channel. There's a number of ways to reach out to the project. Maybe you could build something yourself, or you could run some other distribution. The great thing about open source software is the things that happen to make the Steam Deck work well apply to all of the other distributions. You can run an Ubuntu machine and put Steam on it and benefit from Proton in the same way that the Steam Deck does. Proton, one of the core developers for Proton, is actually a Red Hat employee. So, Valve takes advantage of Proton and the contributions that Red Hatter and other people make to Proton, and every Linux distribution out there benefits from the work that's being done that benefits these other companies. So open source is awesome if you can really embrace it. Doesn't always necessarily mean free as in beer, but free as in freedom is a great thing to get behind. All right, folks, I think that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching, and please make sure to like and subscribe if you like video content like this. I'm working on getting back to my Home Lab series, which I recorded a couple months ago. I started a couple months ago, and I really want to get back to. Things have just been crazy the past couple of months. I feel like they're never slowing down. But if you want to see that stuff, make sure you subscribe, and when I get that released, then you will be able to see it as well. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.